Do you trust the President of the United States? Do you trust the CIA? Do you trust the FBI? What about the Congress? Do you trust the Federal Reserve? Do you trust the NSA? How about the TSA? Do you trust the Supreme Court? Okay, then, if you don't trust any of these other government institutions, why then would you believe anything that comes from the mouth of NASA? The previous is an excerpt from a conversation I had the other day with a close friend about the stunning images of the recent flyby of Pluto, taken from NASA's satellite New Horizons. The persistent no I received from her was the patented response I expected, considering the general distrust people have in our politicians, world leaders, and governmental institutions these days. To say that there is a general sentiment of skepticism and suspicion running through the current zeitgeist about all things statist could be the understatement of the year. What is that age-old adage? How do you know when a politician is lying? When he opens his mouth. The New Horizons satellite was launched on January 19, 2006. For 9.5 years, New Horizons has been floating out in the vacuum and void of deep space. Without any repair, maintenance, or physical updating of its hardware, New Horizons has supposedly traveled swimmingly through our solar system, on course with its original trajectory, unencumbered by any possible extraterrestrial objects, absent of any disturbing influences, all while being flung into the outer orbit of our solar system using the gravitational forces of the planets. It has reached Pluto. Phew. Pluto is 4.67 billion miles from Earth. When New Horizons crossed its path, it took in an enormous amount of data, as claimed by the engineers and spokespeople for NASA. This mission is the most complete and comprehensive study of the planet that we have ever had. Upon receiving this info, New Horizons then shot the data back to Earth, sending it at a distance of, once again, 4.67 billion miles, without a hitch. This is quite an astounding feat, and one could even say that it is almost unbelievable what our government space agencies can accomplish these days. After all that time, money, and technology that went into building, engineering, and launching this satellite, what is offered to the public thus far? A few images, and a very poor animation of Pluto's surface. Now, admittedly, I am a technological neophyte, and am often amazed at some of the miracles of science, so I might not be the best candidate to make assertions about technology I don't fully understand. Hell, my smartphone still dumbfounds me. Though I'm not necessarily qualified to make sweeping assertions about the legitimacy of some of the technology purported, my common sense tells me that all of these claims made by NASA sound a lot more like science fiction than they do science fact. The Hubble telescope was launched in 1990 at a cost of roughly $2.5 billion and is said to be revolving in lower Earth orbit, about 350 miles up. The Hubble is credited with giving us hundreds and thousands of images of pulsars, quasars, nebulae, galaxies, and more. People from all walks of life have been stunned, mesmerized, and wowed at the dazzling images of our beautiful and ever-expanding universe. Hubble pictures plaster the walls of dorm rooms, screensavers, and offices the world over. What a lot of people are not aware of is that the Hubble telescope initially did not work. The first images received back from the Hubble were messy, out of focus, and basically useless due to a manufacturing error of the craft. In December of 1993, approximately 3 years later, 6 astronauts were sent to repair the telescope. The malfunction of the telescope was said to have been made whilst in construction, not when it was launched into space. Did the folks at NASA not test the scope out before sending it into Earth orbit? How is it that we sent a telescope a mere 300 or so miles above the Earth that ended up with malfunctions, yet a satellite coasting in space for nearly a decade is working flawlessly? There seems to be a lack of continuity in the logic here. The Voyager 1 rocket was launched in 1972, long before personal computers, the internet, and iPhones. This comes directly from NASA's website. The total cost of the Voyager mission from May 1972 through the Neptune encounter, including launch vehicles, radioactive power source, RTGs, and DSN tracking support, is $865 million. To launch the Voyager 1 rocket today, accounting for inflation, would cost $5,938,322,000. Yes, that's right, that's almost $5 billion. That's a lot of scratch. The cameras on the Voyager 1 are no longer operable, and the last images the Voyager 1 craft took, according to official sources, were on Valentine's Day in 1990. Remarkably, the technology available in 1972 was still working like a charm 18 whole years later. Meanwhile, the computing ability known to the public in 1972 was, by today's standards, ridiculously primitive. The computer company Intel debuted its 8008 microprocessor, which allowed for a whopping 256 unique arrangements of ones and zeros. As the website for the Computer History Museum tells us, for the first time, a microprocessor could handle both uppercase and lowercase letters, all 10 numerals, punctuation marks, and a host of other symbols. Wow, uppercase and lowercase? Get out of town. Remarkable. 1972 was also the year they released the video game Pong. As I am typing this, a NASA image of the day flashes on the wallpaper of my Chromecast. The image is entitled, "Pluto Dazzles in False Color," and the synchromystic in me goes berserk. Knowing the amount of corruption we find at the highest levels, why is it that every major news media outlet, no matter their political or ideological persuasion, reports on the astounding feats of this organization without ever questioning the legitimacy of the scientific claims it makes? Not a day goes by that I don't see sites like Huffington Post report on the affirmations made by this space agency. The definition of the word press is to apply pressure to something, and hence the role and sole job of journalists is to consistently press for the truth from our world leaders and governmental institutions. The moment the press stops putting pressure on our politicians and instead promotes the narrative as told to us by our government, they become not the source we may rely on for objective facts, but the propaganda machine twisting how we perceive world events. If we do not press the press to do their job, someone else's fiction becomes our reality. Claudia Pavonis. As I typed this, I quickly browsed on my Facebook feed and saw an article about how NASA scientists have discovered yet another Earth-like planet. There's a vast and growing number of people online that are starting to question the legitimacy of literally everything NASA purports. A vastly growing demographic of very passionate folk are starting to heavily scrutinize the continual stream of information coming from NASA. Are all of these people just kooks and cranks, or is there validity to their concerns? It has become a modern trend to demean, belittle, and deny someone's position and point of view by simply accusing them of being a conspiracy theorist. Conspiracy, or to conspire, means to make secret plans jointly to commit an unlawful or harmful act. A theory is a supposition of ideas intended to explain something. A theorem is a general proposition, not self-evident, but proved by a chain of reasoning. Conspiracies are not theories, they are theorems. They can be proven by the simple fact that organized evil has a historicity. It is without question that people in all sorts of different arenas, political, military, economic, social, etc., conspire for myriad reasons all the time. The hardest thing for a modern man to do is admit that the history of such atrocities is not just a thing of the past, it's in the present and in the future as well. Claudia Pavonis. Anyone that has studied conspiracy knows that a grand deception may be created by compartmentalizing the deception. Everyone involved in the conspiracy plays a part by not knowing the part they are truly playing. The formation of a conspiracy is based on the blind acceptance and belief in the disinformation spread, with those lies often going unchecked by the majority involved. This model works so well that even when subversive individuals expose elements of the conspiracy, the generally accepted paradigm is so concretized that the detractor is often labeled a charlatan or nut job. Usually no other attempt is made to either suppress or give credence to the disclosure. The fixedness of the deception whitewashes anyone who doesn't adhere to it. We are also very aware that people can be manipulated and easily coerced into doing all sorts of wicked things with the promise of money, fame, nationalistic heroic pride, or otherwise. Threats and violence are also useful tactics used by mobs, mafias, and monarchies throughout time. A popular article has been making its way around the web lately claiming that over 70 NASA scientists have died under unusual circumstances in the last 2 years. Though we may contest the article's verity, it is interesting nonetheless. The fact is, if someone with a sinister and malicious intent wishes to commit a crime against humanity, they are going to find any way they can to ensure their success. A prime example of this happens every day when men in suits convince young men and women to invade countries and kill other human beings they have never met under completely false pretenses for the benefits and profits of a few. This little trick has been a card up the sleeve of psychopaths for thousands of years. Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States, in the field of commerce and manufacturing, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Woodrow Wilson, The New Freedom. NASA, by being a branch of the government, by design, has a lot to hide. How much of the work that NASA does is completely under impenetrable security? What kind of technology have they created within their top secret research and development sectors? Even if we give NASA the benefit of the doubt and assume that they have absolutely nothing to hide, the government still would not condone disclosure of the information therein, most assuredly citing reasons of national security. People who criticize these sorts of conspiratorial considerations often point to the fact that NASA is really an umbrella for a host of different agencies and companies all working in harmony. There are many subsidiaries that work alongside NASA, and so by saying NASA, you are really speaking about many different space agencies. And as far as I know, this is true. We also know that NASA is not the only space agency working out there in the heavens. China, Russia, France, Austria, and several other countries also send missions into space. It would not be far-fetched to say that the majority of the space agencies, just like the governments of the world, work in cahoots. Hence why they all share space on the International Space Station. Hell, the governments of the world even recently created an international flag based on an ancient sacred geometrical seed of life. A flag, in essence, declaring that the leaders of the countries of the world are working together. We only have to look to the questionable motives of things like Agenda 21 and display the twisted secrecy of Bohemian Grove to see these major power players working wholly in concert. If we are to get conspiratorial here, what is one of the most common phrases associated with a global conspiracy but a new world order, or in other words, a one-world government? Making the attestation that because NASA is engaged in nothing but the pure and noble pursuit of science, and therefore is somehow immune to the corruptions of normal inept government-caused impurities or some grand global conspiracy, is wholly ridiculous. The fact is, good-natured people who don't even know that they don't even know, people who are completely absent to the inner workings of evil, may have no idea that they're even being manipulated. This could be said for any organization or hierarchy, albeit political, religious, or otherwise. People assert that logically, because so many people are involved in something like, per se, the moon landings, it would therefore be impossible to have faked them. I'm going to leave this excerpt here about the Manhattan Project from the website ushistory.org without comment. Secrecy was paramount. Neither the Germans nor the Japanese could learn of the project. Roosevelt and Churchill also agreed that Stalin would be kept in the dark. Consequently, there was no public awareness or debate. Keeping 120,000 people quiet would be impossible. Therefore, only a small privileged cadre of inner scientists and officials knew about the atomic bomb's development. One of the ancient methods of study is known as the trivium, which focuses on grammar, rhetoric, and logic, which is studied in conjunction with the quadrivium, which focuses on number, geometry, music, and cosmology. When this 3 and 4 are combined, it creates the revered 7 classic liberal arts. In the trivium, there is an axiom that is known as the appeal to authority, which is recognizing the false assumption that such and such must be true because said person, expert, proclaimed it to be true. Appeal to authority is also a way to combat the mentality of, well, I can't understand these things, but someone else has it all figured out, so I'll trust them. This is a dangerous mindset to adopt and stifles one's personal investigation into his or her own world. It is noted that there are hosts of subjects, machines, technologies, sciences, and the like that the average person does not fully comprehend that work flawlessly with or without our understanding of it. That said, it should never be off limits to allow serious queries into the presentations and declarations made by any and all authoritative administrations, and we should not forego our own investigation into subjects that might be controversial because self-appointed experts tell us otherwise. It is very interesting to note how quickly people will aggressively and vehemently argue with anyone who even dares question the hallowed institutions dedicated to the supposed methods of pure science. Remind a staunch agnostic and science fiction geek that the theory of gravity remains just that, a theory, and you might incite such a response. For many, the edifice of modern reductionist science often receives the kind of worship equal to that of the most ardent religious devotee. Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson is almost looked upon as a living god and racks up a mighty 4 million Twitter followers. Without disrespecting and dismissing Neil's work as a science teacher, let me ask you this. What has Neil deGrasse Tyson personally discovered that has changed the nature of how we understand reality? It is rather astounding that Mr. Tyson's list of accolades, awards, and honorary doctorates is quite long, and yet if you ask the average person what specific thing has Neil done to push the boundaries of science, I can guarantee you that you're going to get nothing but a blank stare. Being the director of the Hayden Planetarium is not like discovering the laws of motion or establishing the foundations of quantum physics. Why is it that these people often go unchecked and unquestioned? If we are not allowed to question figureheads like these and institutions like NASA, Are we really engaging in the true, skeptical, scientific method ourselves? Many independent researchers online have noted that Wernher von Braun, a Nazi scientist, was brought to America by Operation Paperclip to help get NASA off the ground. Another key player at NASA was Jack Parsons, the lead rocket propulsion engineer and a known occultist. It has also been claimed that science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001: A Space Odyssey, was the brains, or at least inspiration, behind satellite communications. Numerous books and documentaries have been produced centering their investigations on the anomalies and inconsistencies of the Apollo missions. Many believe that the ability to travel to the moon and back in 1969, a mere 11 years after the inception of NASA, with less technology than what exists in modern-day smartphones, is an outlandish proposition. These points have been belabored on the web many times, and so no further elucidation on them needs to be made here. If it turns out that the Apollo lunar missions were faked, as the mounting evidence suggests it surely was, and thus we know that from the very get-go NASA has been a corrupting and deceiving force, how are we supposed to trust anything that comes from the agency now? As an analogy, let us suppose that you took your child to a daycare, and later found out that the staff were beating the children. Would you ever feel safe to take your child there again? The celebrated filmmaker Stanley Kubrick was heavily involved with NASA when he was shooting his seminal and groundbreaking film 2001: A Space Odyssey. Stanley teamed up with NASA when working on the film and even shot much of it in NASA's confidential and highly securitized complex. To those of you that may be questioning this assertion, there are numerous proofs that I could provide here as evidence, but for brevity's sake, I will direct you to the documentary posted here. This video wasn't made by some tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy wackadoodle from the web trying to convince you that we never went to the moon. This is a documentary made by NASA themselves for public consumption. I would highly recommend watching it in its entirety. Stanley Kubrick could easily be called one of the most cryptic, symbolic, and enigmatic filmmakers to ever get behind the camera. Knowing how directly and intimately Kubrick worked with NASA and how much he must have known about the Apollo missions back then, should we dare speculate that there is a hidden message within his film 2001: A Space Odyssey about the possible malevolent aspects of NASA? In the opening chapter of the film entitled The Dawn of Man, an ape is seen figuring out how to use a bone as a tool to smash things. A few moments later, we see him back with his clan in a territorial dispute with another group of apes. Being the aggressor, he then uses the bone to beat and kill an opposing ape. After he murders the other ape, he screams and throws the bone up. As it flies through the air, Stanley cuts the scene and transitions from the bone to a space capsule floating above the Earth. Clearly, the bone is representative of technology used as a weapon against a fellow member of the ape species. Could this be Stanley's cryptic and occult way of warning us about the motives, deceptions, and lies of the United States government and NASA? If we are to consider this to be the case, the more profound question we may ask is, how would the control of space offer any gain? I feel that a deep consideration of the answer to this question is merited. Are we supposed to take, hook, line, and sinker, everything that NASA tells us about deep space, missions to planets, and the workings of our universe as indisputable fact? Are we really going to accept wholeheartedly and without question the continual stream of information from a source who is a branch of the same institution that has a history of deception, lies, and manipulation? There is a vast number of people who view attacks like September 11th as a false flag event, perpetrated by people within our own government. If realities such as this are truly the case, are we then supposed to trust the very same organization who constructed, or was, at the very least, complicit in the events of September 11th to tell us the truth about the heavens above? Was Stanley trying to tell us that the monolith of NASA is the bone that the ape of government is using to beat the head of mankind? The important thing is to not stop questioning. Albert Einstein. The world is in a constant conspiracy against the brave. It's the age-old struggle, the roar of the crowd on the one side and the voice of your conscience on the other. Douglas MacArthur. The remaining fact is this: if we don't ask tough questions and demand answers from our quote-unquote authorities, we will forever be leaving the explanation of our world to people most of us will never meet, never speak with, and never know. And as someone who has been on this plane of existence for 36 years, if I have learned one thing, it is to never give my complete trust to anyone who claims they are an authority. When asked about the moon landing hoax on the popular podcast The Joe Rogan Experience, one of the things Neil deGrasse Tyson gave as a proof was the amount of jet fuel that the Saturn V rocket housed. Knowing the kind of dynamic case that has been made against the authenticity of the Apollo missions by independent researchers online, simply citing the amount of jet fuel in a rocket as proof of us going to the moon is about as scientific as Scientology using Tom Cruise as proof of their success as a religious institution. And also let us not forget, jet fuel can't melt steel beams. Is this the kind of conclusive evidence and reasoning that modern science is using to secure their claims? If so, go ahead and call me a dingbat and crackpot. I'll happily sit in the corner of the room, donning my tinfoil hat, wondering who really did shoot JFK. Much love to all. P.S. For those of you gematria hounds out there, calculate the following. PSS. The Freemasonic compass dotting the Masonic Bible is open to 47 degrees, and the square is open to, of course, 90 degrees. What's 47 plus 90?